Are the Liberals setting the agenda in this campaign? You keep talking about things your government has done in the past, but what new are you offering to voters that would have big impact if you're elected again?
Well, we'd offer more of the same, quite frankly, focusing on people. What do communities need? What do families need? And how do we deliver on those priorities? It's interesting that Mr. Wilkinson's going back to the future. It was their bridge proposal that led to divisiveness in the Lower Mainland. Obviously, we need to fix the massive congestion problem, but their solution was a tolled bridge that only one community out of the 28 in Metro wanted to see built. We sat down, talked to everybody, and came up with a consensus plan. And I think that's the type of government that people can count on for me going forward.
Talking about homelessness, if your party thinks Andrew Wilkinson's solution is perhaps dehumanizing or unrealistic, what is your alternative? I know you've asked people for patience on this front for a long time, but with winter coming up, that is a very tangible concern. What is your immediate plan to help deal with those encampments?
Well, certainly with shelter beds being closed because of the pandemic and the need for physical distancing, that's created tremendous strains on social agencies that provide services to people, vulnerable populations. And we've been working as hard as we can with municipalities to get new housing built. Modular housing has been extremely successful with wraparound services, social workers, helping people get into treatment processes. All of that will take time, and we need to redouble those efforts as the winter comes upon us. But we need to do it in a collaborative way, cooperating with municipalities and the service providers that are so desperately important to this process.
Yet I was talking with some homeless advocates and housing advocates on the island in Cowichan Valley. They've actually been proactively building tent cities in Ladysmith and in Duncan because they say that the solutions are just too far off.
Well, we've been working with people in communities, people in encampments to try and find the best way forward. And it's going to be a mix of all of these options, quite frankly. I know that we've eliminated tent cities on the Wally Strip in Surrey, on Pandora Drive in Victoria, my hometown, Nanaimo. Oppenheimer Park is now no longer occupied, but that is just in some cases moved the problem elsewhere. They don't need contempt, they need compassion, and they need supports, and that involves the whole community, not just governments.
Looking at the simultaneous public health emergencies, 4,000 people have died of a drug overdose on your watch. 230 have also died from COVID. Yet the drug overdose crisis has been a public health emergency for years. So why has your government not acted with the same urgency as it has with the pandemic, especially when the provincial health officer has outlined specific things that can be done at a provincial level?
Well, I would say we have done a great deal on the opioid crisis. We were the first province in the country to have a standalone minister for mental health and addiction. So we had someone getting up every day focused only on the opioid crisis and the need for mental health services. And we were making progress until the pandemic hit, and a couple of variables came into play. I talked about the shelter beds. We've seen our borders closed, which means that the fentanyl, the dirty drug supply is getting dirtier. So that's why I reached out to Prime Minister Trudeau and said we need to take the criminalized element out of here. We need to focus like a laser on the pushers and the people that are taking advantage of vulnerable people, and that means law enforcement. But we need help with treatment, and we need help with safe supply or prescription alternatives. That's Dr. Henry's solution, and we're working on that. Not as fast as she would like, not as fast as I would like, but we need collaboration, again, support from the federal government. There's a lot of good talk going on, but people are in crisis, and we need to be there, not just us, but the city and the feds as well.
You mentioned the border issue with the toxic drug supply. If the borders are to be closed indefinitely through the pandemic, what kind of pressure are you applying on Ottawa?
Well, again, we need to make sure that we have prescription alternatives for people. That's the clean supply. And we need to have safe injection facilities and the harm reduction programs that work so well at Insight on Hastings Street when that was first started here in Vancouver. But the problem grows every day. And the challenges they seem insurmountable to vulnerable populations, particularly people who are living rough on the streets.
Let's get back to the number one issue, why we're having an election in the first place. I think a lot of voters are confused about that, at least from the public reasoning on that front. Mm-hmm. You said it's because of problems with the Greens that go all the way back to the summer. So why didn't you highlight those cracks earlier? Because when people heard that when the election was called, they kind of felt blindsided, like if this was really an issue months in the running, then why are we just hearing about this now?
Well, I grappled with the calling of the election, and I take full responsibility for it. It was my decision and mine alone. But I looked at the past 3.5 years. It's been that long since the last election, and people have forgotten that we are a minority government because we've been acting as if we weren't. We've had great collaboration on many, many issues with the Green Party, and sometimes as well with the Liberal Party. Fewer examples of that, to be sure. But I looked at the next 4 years and the challenges we face, not just with public health and safety, opioids, COVID, climate crisis as well. And I looked at the challenges, and it won't take a few months to resolve these issues. It will take a few years.
Yet there was speculation for months before the election was actually called. So is that not just retroactive spin to kind of blame it on the Greens in hindsight?
No, I highlighted some of the differences the Greens and I have had in recent months, but we did do a great deal together. I don't want to dismiss that. But the challenges of not being able to move quickly when situations present themselves in the midst of a pandemic, I think is pretty profound.
I want to ask you about Indigenous relations. I remember talking to you, I think it was in February, and you mentioned that the Wet'suwet'en conflict to date had been your most difficult challenge since you've taken office. You've said that UNDRIP and reconciliation is a priority, yet we've heard almost nothing about that so far in this campaign. Is this not a priority for you now?
Oh, it absolutely is, and it's not the waving of a wand. You don't eliminate almost 200 years of colonialism over a winter. We've made great progress in terms of reconciliation agreements with First Nations. The treaty process is revitalized again, which is a parallel process to reconciliation. UNDRIP is work plans being developed. That was part of the legislation. The Wet'suwet'en issues were challenging because the courts had determined back in the 1990s that rights and title existed, and the hereditary system in Wet'suwet'en territory should be legitimized. And we're almost 30 years since that court decision, and that's why there was so much frustration in Wet'suwet'en territory, rightly so.
Talking about elected versus the hereditary chiefs, and should that situation flare up again, how can you ensure that the province will find a peaceful road through this?
Well, because we've demonstrated that we can. The crisis of February was averted by working with the federal government, working with the hereditary leadership. The elected representatives were already there. There's frustration in the community, and it's not frustration with me or the NDP or the federal government. There's frustration that for generations they've been collaborating and trying, or frustrated they can't work together, elected and hereditary. They need to figure that out. The Wet'suwet'en need to do that, and they're in the process of doing that right now.